Hello and welcome to The Print. This is Fareeha Iftikhar. Joining with us today is Professor M Vidyasagar, a distinguished professor in the Department of Artificial Intelligence and Electrical Engineering at IIT Hyderabad. Over the years, Professor Vidyasagar has made significant contribution to India's scientific and technological landscape. From playing a key role in developing the control laws for India's light combat aircraft or Tejas during his time as the head of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics, which is a laboratory under DRDO, to his contribution in the field of artificial intelligence in education. His work has been central to shaping how India's COVID 19 trajectory was modeled and forecast during the different waves of pandemic. In 2012, he was elected as a Fellow of Royal Society in recognition of his contribution to scientific knowledge.
Okay.
Welcome to the Print Sir, and it's our pleasure to have you with us today. And before we discuss about your recent reaction on the government's plan to introduce AI curriculum schools from class third onwards, we want you to take you back to your journey so far, sir. Sir, not many people know about your involvement with the light combat aircraft now called Tejas. You had led the push for indigenous development of the control laws for LCA at a time when India was heavily relying on foreign consultants. Sir, can you tell our viewers more about it and what were the challenges your team faced at a time to replace it with a homegrown solution at that time?
Yes, so I returned to India in 1989. I joined as the director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics. And practically off the plane, I was put on a review committee to review the preparedness of the LCA program. And there were a number of challenges, and the control law was one of them. And the challenge in the LCA control law is that the LCA is an unstable airplane. Now, your viewers may say, why should a plane be unstable? Because that
Yeah.
sounds bad, right? But the fact is that the more unstable a plane is, the more maneuverable it is in a dogfight with another airplane. So you want to make the plane as unstable as possible while still retaining the ability to control it. Okay.
Yes.
So in the case of the LCA, it was the most unstable aircraft at that time ever conceptualized. And even now, it's the most unstable flight fighter aircraft in service anyway. And it's also the first fighter plane to be inducted into service without crashing even once during the testing phase. So these are all some of the achievements. So as I said, 89 is when I got put on this review committee, and people said that the controller of the unstable plane was a major challenge. So at that point, Dr. V.S. Arunachalam was the scientific advisor, and he was pushing for the involvement of a company called Martin Marietta. It doesn't exist anymore. It got merged with Lockheed, and now it's called Lockheed Martin Marietta. But back then, it was a separate Martin Marietta. And so some of us who had a control background were not particularly impressed with those people because we didn't think they knew the modern controller design methods. They were still stuck in the very traditional methods. So then the major change was that in June of 1992, Dr. Arunachalam left and Dr. Abdul Kalam became the Director General of DRDO. In particular, ex officio, he also became the Director General of the Aeronautical Development Agency that was building the LCA. So he convened a meeting of various controls experts, including me and Professor Narasimha, who now passed away, to say, can we build it indigenously? And so I told Professor Narasimha, I'm going to give you 1 month. You talk to all the people and come back with a yes or no recommendation. So Professor Narasimha made a recommendation to Dr. Kalam that yes, it can be done indigenously. So then he gave us the go ahead to build the controller within the country. And there was another professor at the Indian Institute of Science called I.G. Sharma, and he was tasked with monitoring the progress of the control design team because the board of governors of the ADA met every 3 months, and one of the line items was Professor Sharma's report on whether we were making good progress or not. So it wasn't very difficult for us to do better than what Martin Marietta was doing because myself and some of my scientists, we were familiar with the latest control design methodologies, which they were not. But the problem was, in order to simulate this control law, we needed an aircraft simulator which did not exist in India at that time because there were very strong restrictions on what kind of computers could be sold to India. This was called the mega top limitation. So we actually had to go to the UK to
Okay.
another company called BAE, where we loaded our airplane model and our controller onto their flight simulator, and our pilots flew that to see if it was handling properly or not. And they gave a very good report that yes, the design is fine. And I can tell you a small amusing side story that while our people were there, the BAE people told our Indian fighter pilot, why don't you also fly the EFA, European fighter aircraft? And so our pilots did, and they told the BA engineers that the LCA handled better than the EFA. So of course they weren't very amused by that. But the interesting point is that the same pilot at the next meeting of the Board of Governors of ADA mentioned this to everybody present that LCA was doing fine. And then, of course, it went through various clearances, and finally, operational clearance was given, and then we had one squadron of LCA Tejas incorporated. There have been some production bottlenecks afterward, but my role ended with the what was called a flight operational clearance. That meant we did our job. The rest was up to the manufacturers. So that's roughly my role.
Got it. Then, sir, how do you see the long-term impact of the control loss teamwork, which developed the flight control algorithm for Tejas at that time, on India's aerospace ecosystem?
Well, I mean, the controller doesn't change very much. What we did was we designed the control law initially for very limited flight envelope, as it is called, and then you keep expanding it. So that means the plane has to fly at higher altitudes and it has to fly at higher velocity. We did all that, and then there is what is known as the post-stall regime. I can just show it with my hands. If a fighter plane goes very vertical, that is called the post-stall regime, and it's exactly what the name implies. The plane will stall. So if you stay there, it's going to crash. But the secret is to go through the post-stall regime and emerge on the other side with no adverse consequences. So we designed that controller as well. So the LCA is now a highly maneuverable airplane. And more important is that our design philosophy could be adapted to other variations. So like there is a Tejas Mark 1, Mark 1A, then there's what is called the twin engine naval fighter version. So all these control laws were built off the original control law. Now we have this thing on the drawing board called AMCA, Advanced Multi-Role Combat Aircraft. So that controller is not the LCA controller, but it provided a starting point for that design. So to put it very simply, if we hadn't done the original one correctly, nothing else would have followed.
Sir, presently there's a lot of emphasis on Make in India across sectors, including defense. How do you see we have come when it comes to indigenous R&D in the defense sector as of now? How far we have come?
Well, until and unless the government can figure out a way in which R&D can be done without spending money, I think we're going to be stuck where we are. I mean, the government doesn't fund R&D in any sector, including defense. So if you look in the civilian sector, the overall fraction of GDP that's spent on R&D has been coming down, down, down. According to the government's own figures, in 2014 it was something like 0.85 or 0.84% of the GDP. Now it is down to 0.65%. So that's almost a 25% cut in R&D funds. So you can't be state of the art if you don't spend money. I mean, countries like China spend 2.5% of the GDP on R&D, and their GDP is six times ours. So we have a small GDP, and we're spending a smaller fraction of that. The
Yeah.
other problem we have in India is that the import option is always lurking there. So we don't really have a wholehearted commitment to indigenous development. We don't say we're going to sink or swim with our own designs. What happens is that as soon as we get ready to build something and induct it into service, somebody will come and say, why do you want to develop your own? We'll give you our stuff. And then our armed forces also say, where else have you proved this? Well,
Hmm.
how can you prove it anywhere else? We're designing for the Indian armed forces. So who is going to buy our stuff outside India if the Indians don't buy it themselves? So these are all irritants that have, I think, massively held back the adoption of indigenous technology. And of course, there is the issue of paying competitive salaries. So when we were doing the LCA control law, this was in the second half of the 1990s. Back then, a typical salary for an engineer was about 16,000 rupees a month. Sounds difficult, but that sounds difficult to believe, but that's true. So we suggested that we wanted to pay all these engineers an extra 10,000 rupees per month, flat rate. It
Okay.
was not pensionable. It was not a part of the base and therefore not subject to the dearness allowance. And it was only for 5 years, at the end of which we take a look at it again. This was immediately rejected by the Babudam. Why? Because the Babus don't want any non IAS person to make more money than an IAS person with the same number of years of experience. This is like a sacred rule for them. So, how can you treat the design of a very complicated fighter control like an IAS Babu's file pushing? I'm sorry to be so blunt. You have to pay people what they are worth, but we don't have that attitude in India. So that's why things get delayed.
Yeah, correct.
Think that this Martin Marietta company, which was trying to design our controller, they pay the same salaries as the American civil servants in the USA? No, they pay much more. But we don't have that culture in India of paying people what they are worth.
So, sir, that means there is a need to push both in terms of investment in research and development and also the way researchers are being paid at this moment.
Yeah, both are correct. So the government has to make the investment in terms of buying the hardware. For example, a lot of people are critical of the GTRA, the Gas Turbine Research Establishment, because they don't have a functioning, excuse me, they don't have a functioning Kaveri engine. But do you know, even now we don't have a high altitude test facility for the Kaveri. Every time we want to test it at a high altitude, we have to take the whole engine to Russia. So how come the government has not invested something like 300-400 crores for a high altitude test facility? I think that cost, I'm not entirely sure about it. But it's not the money. The point is, if you want an engine, you have to test it at high altitude. And to do that, you need a high altitude test facility. And if it costs money, okay, you have to build it. So that attitude is lacking in our government.
Correct. Sir, as a distinguished professor at the AI department of IIT Hyderabad, you recently have raised some concern over government plan to introduce AI curriculum in school from class third onwards. Sir, do you think in this tech age teaching AI to students from very young age can be counterproductive?
See, I think there's a confusion about AI. There are two very distinct things which you should not mix up. Okay. First thing is using AI to deliver a better quality of teaching experience to the students. And AI is wonderful for that purpose because it can do a whole lot of things. For example, it can give personalized education to a diversified classroom. So let's say there are 40 students in the classroom, and they're not all going to have the same ability. We know that. So
Yeah.
how do you offer a different pace for different students so that if somebody is fast, you allow them to progress. If somebody is a bit slow, then you give them a lot more hints so that they will eventually find the right answer. And also, in India, the biggest problem, as you know very well, is the shortage of qualified teachers.
Yeah.
So the AI teacher can compensate to a large extent for the not particularly good quality of teachers, especially in remote areas. Since you mentioned IIT Hyderabad, let me just mention we have something called the Center for Rural Education.
Okay.
And see, physically, IIT Hyderabad is not in the city of Hyderabad. It's about 50 kilometers away in something called Rangareddy district. And that area is very rural. So the schools there are typical rural schools. Now, I want to mention that there's a popular misconception that rural means poor. No, these are not poor places, but they are rural places. So their infrastructure is going to be bad because of that.
Yeah.
And you could be the richest person in the village, but the school to which your kid will go will have certain deficiencies in the infrastructure. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So AI can certainly help in overcoming a lot of these deficiencies. And we have an idea. There may be about 8, 10 of us. We have an idea of developing an end-to-end teaching solution based on AI and deploy it in the Center for Rural Education. And then once we prove it, then we can just give it away, make it open source, so that anybody who wants it can roll it out wherever they want to. But thus far, I haven't been successful in finding anyone to fund it. And the ironic part, I will tell you, about 2 or 3 budgets ago, Mrs. Nirmala Sitaraman made a very important change to the corporate social responsibility regulations. And the important change was a company can give money to a research institution like IIT Hyderabad and use whatever money they have given as an offset against their CSR obligations. Okay, and this is not just for us. Every educational institution, every CSIR lab has the same privilege. But the amount of CSR funding that actually comes to R&D is very small. That's something the government can look into. For instance, they may say, okay, CSR obligation is 2% of profit. Now, that 2% can go wherever it wants. But if the government were to say 2% to the CSR obligation, 1% for NGOs, 1% for R&D, that would make a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
1% of corporate profit, but it will still be a huge amount of money. So these are some of the things that the government could consider. Now let me loop back to the original question. So up
Yeah.
to now, I've talked about how to use AI to deliver a better teaching experience to the students. The second thing, which I tweeted, and that was kind of a shock to me. And I'm a small Twitter handle, about 8,000 followers or so. And if one of my tweets gets 2,000 views, I feel happy, and 50, 100 likes. That tweet saying that what can you possibly teach to third grade students about AI? And that has absolutely gone viral. I mean,
Oh,
450,000 views, 11, 12,000 likes, 500 replies. I'm not even able to read all the replies. So I seem to have touched some raw nerve in people. Usually that's how things go viral because I guess a lot of people felt this wasn't a very smart idea. And the reason is that if you want to say what should be taught to a 3-year-old, a third grader, Well, they've all heard about AI, no question about it. But they want to know what it is. Now, my worry is that you teach them some very transient skill, like say how to prompt chat GPT so that you can write an article. Well, I can tell you very confidently that chat GPT is not going to be there 10, 15 years from now. I
Correct.
don't know what will be there,
Hmm.
but chat GPT and all those other things won't be there because AI is a very rapidly moving field.
It's
So,
evolving. Yeah.
so you have to teach stuff that doesn't disappear with time. See, remember, the original press release said they are teaching third graders. So you can do the arithmetic. Somebody is starting third grade now, they will be in high school for 10 years
Correct.
and then 4 more years for a bachelor's. So you have to teach stuff that is still going to be valuable 14 years from now. So why do we teach science, basic science? Why do we teach mathematics, arithmetic? Because they're never going to go out of fashion. So my worry is that the curriculum has to be designed very carefully by consulting AI experts, people like me, but also the educators. See, if you come to me and say, what should you teach a third grade student? Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I may guess something, but a proper educator will say, no, that's not it, this is it. But then if you talk only to third grade teachers, they won't know what is of lasting value and what is of transient nature. And that's where people like me can contribute. So if the government is really serious about imparting some core knowledge of AI to third grade students or any level, fifth grade, 10th grade, it doesn't really matter. They should actually put together a team of people who are both educators, some educators, and some AI experts. I said that that whole thing sounded like just some announcement made to get some brownie points, maybe. That and maybe I'm being a bit harsh, but that's how it sounded to me. So that's what I said, and I guess a lot of other people agreed with me. At least 11,000 other people.
But sir, according to you, what is the correct stage to introduce like to students to these tools, AI tools, which are so much in use and readily available, and any like young kid can also access them since everyone has an access to internet now.
No, there is nothing like too early. For example, you can teach third graders how does a machine think. How do you know that the machine is thinking? So, for example, in 1938, uh, Alan Turing, one of the greatest computer scientists ever, you can say he even invented the field. He invented something called the Turing test for when is a machine considered to be intelligent. Now you can challenge kids, and kids are very imaginative, they're very bright, as you know. So suppose you say to the child, okay, behind that curtain is another human being or a machine, and you're allowed to ask any question you want. But based on the answer, you have to tell is that person or a machine.
Yeah.
And that will trigger the thought processes of the youngsters like, oh, okay, how do I tell a machine from a human? So those are all very constant questions. I mean, as I mentioned, this paper was written in 1938. So we're in 2025, so 75 years later approximately. But the answer to that question, how do you tell whether a machine is intelligent, keeps evolving. But so you can trigger this kind of a thought process in a student and say, what do you think makes a machine intelligent? Okay, things like that. But what I'm worried about is that in the zeal to introduce AI, they will just teach some very transient skills, like how do you prompt chat GPT or something like that. How do you use uh, Ghibli, I think that's the name of the software, to produce some cartoonized version of your picture, of
Yeah.
your own self. What is the point of that? I mean, those are all toys, right? I mean, you can do that in your spare time, but you shouldn't be wasting classroom time to do things like that. So again, to clarify, I'm not at all opposed to introducing AI to youngsters, even school children, but the curriculum has to be carefully designed to separate the wheat from the chaff. Which part of AI is going to be of lasting value, and which is likely to go away in 5 years, 10 years, something like that.
So these days also we hear this term called ethical use of AI very often. So do you think there is there is any fixed definition to ethical use of AI in this rapidly changing world where AI is being used extensively with every part of the life?
Now, there are sub branches of AI. One is ethical AI that you just mentioned. There is also something called responsible AI.
Yeah.
Uh, and the topics initially became very fuzzy. What is ethical AI? And then this started with companies like Google. And if you think that American companies are less bureaucratic than Indian companies, please think again. Because they had it's like a chief ethics officer inside Google. And this person was supposed to sign off on all the projects. And many of these people don't have a computer science background. So that has become one more roadblock. Then, over a period of time, the research community itself evolved standards. So they had test cases. So let me give a concrete example. Suppose you apply for a bank loan or a life insurance policy. So is the likelihood of your getting accepted dependent on extraneous factors? So in the US, it will be like race. In India, it may be like caste or religion. So these are all things that you can do to make sure that your AI is ethical, that these extraneous factors are not taken into account, right? Now that's a statement of principle, and nobody will disagree with the statement of principle. But now I have this AI package which I'm giving to you. How do you tell whether it is conforming to your definition of ethics or not?
Yeah.
Do you understand the challenge? So, what the research community has done is evolved a bunch of methods of validating whether a particular AI solution is or is not ethical, and similarly is or is not responsible. And the two sound similar, but they're not quite the same. Uh, so, for instance, responsible AI is like, can you make a deep fake video of somebody? Technologically, you can. Nothing
Yeah.
stops you. Now we have enough computing power that you can create totally fake videos, right?
Correct. Correct.
But should you? And the challenge there is detecting a fake video is about 1,000 times slower than generating a fake video. You see what I'm saying? In the
Yeah.
time it takes you to find that one video is fake, I can pump out 1,000 fake videos. So, how do you handle this mismatch? So, these are all the kinds of questions these branches of AI are going into. And I think they're very important questions. There are people in India working on these fields. For a future interview like this, I can suggest some names also for you if you are
Sure.
interested.
Yes, surely, sir. So my next question is, you had mentioned a while ago about the research and funding, of course. So based on your experience both in like academia and industry, I would like to know your views about the present, your assessment about the current state of STEM research and STEM education in India.
So, the one thing that you will notice immediately, I have criticized the government for not spending enough to support R&D. But one would have to criticize Indian industry much more severely for not spending anything on R&D. So if you look at the US, they spend like 2% of their GDP on R&D. It's not all government. Private sector also spends a lot. I mean, you can go back to the 1940s they had the famous Bell Laboratories, right?
Yeah.
And the Bell Labs invented so many things that we just use routinely today. And similarly, in countries like China, Japan, they have Mitsubishi Labs, Hitachi Labs. There are no comparable entities in India. Okay, in the sense that a company doesn't seem to even aspire to building an Indian Bell Labs, an Indian Mitsubishi Labs, an Indian Hitachi Labs. And here again, this whole notion of CSR kind of comes into the picture. If I'm not mistaken, and if I'm wrong, you can correct me, but I understand that a company can set up an R&D unit, and so long as it is sort of kept at arm's length, they can give some of their own CSR funding to this R&D unit.
Yeah.
I don't know why this doesn't happen. So Indian industry is pretty much a trading industry. It's not an innovative industry. So they don't aspire to make breakthrough products. They are kind of very short-term oriented, buy low, sell high, trading sort of a mentality. And that's not going to be a sustainable advantage in today's world. See, why should anybody do R&D? You do R&D to give you a head start over your competitors. Okay,
Correct.
suppose I do something and I launch it today. Now, once I launch it, my competitors can buy my product, take it apart, and see what's inside. But it will take them time. So, if I launch a product based on my own R&D, that gives me maybe 2 years of head start on my competitors, typically.
Yeah.
If I sit still for those 2 years, at the end of 2 years, my advantage is gone. So I have to use that 2 years head start to create the next generation of the product, and the
Correct.
next, and the next. So until and unless we adopt this approach of constant innovation as a way of giving us the technological and sustainable advantage, we're going to miss the race. And I think it's just a mindset problem with Indian industry. I don't think they really aspire for technological leadership. And maybe this, I mean, I'm not a student of Indian history. Maybe it goes back hundreds of years when Indian traders went all over the world. So maybe they found it easy to just buy low and sell high and didn't see the need to innovate at all.
Sir, can government do anything to push more like industries' interest in R&D and research?
So the government has announced, I think, 1 lakh crores fund or something like that. But I mean, there is this famous English saying, right? You can lead the horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. I think that's the situation with our industry. See, any company that produces anything, if they realize that their sustainable advantage over their rivals is R&D, then they'll invest in R&D. But they are much more interested in importing the next generation of the same product from somewhere, sticking a made in India label, and then selling it domestically. That Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal coined a very beautiful phrase I like very much. He says poverty of aspiration. And I really like that because I think in Indian industry, I see this quite a lot, this poverty of aspiration. So if you don't break out of that cycle, we'll never be world leaders. However, having said all that negative thing, let me add that at the startup level, there are a lot of people who have very high aspiration. So previously, the government had put a lot of blocks in the way of startups. Slowly, a lot of these blocks are being removed. Some of are still there, but I think situation is now manageable. The other problem that used to be there was venture capitalists.
Yeah.
Venture capitalists didn't want to give money to Indian startup because they felt the returns were poor.
Hmm.
But that mindset is also changing.
Now, yeah, correct.
There are now good side venture capitalists. What I mean by that is if you want 10 million, to 100 million to get your company started, there are VCs who are capable of putting this kind of money.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they'll just hand over the money, obviously. They'll do a thorough evaluation of your proposal. But let's say 5 or 10 years ago, even raising $5 million was very hard. Nobody wanted to spend that kind of money in India. So that mindset change has happened to some extent. The tax regulations, exit strategies, all those things, the government is slowly chipping away one by one on some of the roadblocks. So maybe we'll eventually, once the current entrepreneurs become big industries themselves, for
Yeah.
example, Apple, which are making that EV scooter, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Completely homegrown company. And now it has listed, and its market cap is now at a level where people are beginning to take it seriously. So if you had 100 authors, not just one, then the culture of Indian industry would change, I think.
Surely. Sir, my next question is about the field of engineering. Sir, in the last few years or a decade, I should say, we have seen that students have showing like growing interest in computer sciences and like moving away from the core engineering disciplines. Not in every institute, but in IITs also we see such a trend. So I just want to know about your views about this trend.
You see, that's a correct observation, even though in the last 2, 3 years, it's reversing.
It's reversing, but again, like marginally.
No, no, it's not marginal. It's pretty noticeable. Um, Another noticeable trend, which you might not have noticed, is that people are moving away from engineering totally, going
Correct.
into big
That
farm and
also
things
happens.
like that. Okay.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
Uh, you know, Professions like chartered accountancy
Yeah.
are now coming back into fashion. So again, it's just a question of salary, right? The simple fact of the matter is that if you do a bachelor's in, say, chemical engineering, what is your starting salary going to be? Versus if you do uh, a bachelor's in computer science. Right now, the mismatch is of the order of 3 or 4 to 1. Will make 3 or 4 times the money, even at an ordinary Indian company, if you have a degree in computer science. And the other point is that the possibilities of immigration was one of the big lures to do computer science. But now, with the changes in the immigration regulations in the US,
Yeah.
I think that may be less of a possibility. For example, a lot of Indians go overseas on what they call the self financed master's degree.
Yeah.
So these people are taking loans of 70, 80 lakh, 1 crore just to do a master's degree for which they get no assistance. They're spending the money out of their pocket. They are hoping that they will stay beyond their degree on what is called the OPT. That's, I think, 28 months or something.
Yeah.
And then, with some luck, they'll convert it into a H1B visa. So if that avenue is closed off, nobody is going to be crazy enough to spend 1 crore of rupees for a master's degree, which is not necessarily any better than what you can get in India. See, the people doing this self-financed masters are not going to the top schools. They are not even going to what I'll call the A minus B plus school. They are going to very ordinary university because the purpose is not to do the masters. The purpose is to get the OPT. Okay.
Yeah.
So once that avenue is closed off, there'll be a complete readjustment of the situation. So a miniature version of that was during COVID, when people couldn't physically go abroad. So
Correct.
we saw roughly a doubling of applications for the master's and PhD programs in India. So if the self-financed master's option is closed off, we may see not a temporary blip like the COVID blip, but maybe a more permanent change in the number of Indians who choose to stay behind for higher studies. And that can only be a good thing. And that's a very cheap expense for the government. See, right now, the Minister of Education gives what are called the MOE fellowship. They're fairly limited in number,
Yeah.
but as a part of the overall uh, education budget, this is trivial. I mean, if the government were to say we're going to increase the number of Minister of Education scholarships by 5 times, you won't even notice it. I mean, the government won't even notice it. But imagine a person is sitting here in India.
Yeah.
They have the option of taking a 1 crore loan to go abroad versus doing a master's in India for which they'll get a stipend. If the Minister of Education were to increase the number of stipends by 5 times, factor of five, the impact on the budget will be not completely nominal. They won't even notice it. It will be in the fourth or fifth significant place. Now, suppose an Indian student has the option of taking a loan of 1 crore rupees to do a self-financed master's and no option to get it back because no OPT, no H1B. But by staying in India, they not only can they do a master's, but they even get a stipend.
Correct.
At least some of them will opt to stay in India. And
Correct.
that will certainly be a good thing for us.
Yeah, my last question is, sir, do you think these changes in US immigration law is going to have a long-lasting impact on our education and research system here in India?
I don't know how long lasting the US immigration changes are going to be.
But will
Uh,
there be some immediate like consequences?
well, there'll be an immediate change. For
Hmm.
example, like in the COVID period, when no one could go abroad, we saw this big spike in master's applications. Then, when COVID ended and the travel restrictions were removed, the number came down again. It
Yeah.
could happen, but the other point, of course, is that the people in the H-1B visa, they have something like 100 years wait to get a green card. So that's also going to be a factor. And something that you would know as a journalist better than I would is how much of this anti-India feeling in the US is real and how much of it is fake. Okay. I think if the average Indians begin to feel a little bit insecure, a little bit unwelcome, then they may decide to come back. But you would know that better than I would, I think.
And sir, do you think it will help India to tap back its talent from the US?
One of my friends, who's actually a US citizen, but came back to India a few years ago, he makes the following joke. He says China launched its 1,000 talents program to lure its talented Chinese back to India, but Donald Trump has launched a 1,000 talent program for India free. The government doesn't have to spend any money. So I think that we should take advantage. See, but I feel that there's a limited role for the government. I mean, what can the government do?
Yeah.
See, Indian industry has to be prepared to take these highly qualified returnees. I mean, not everybody is highly qualified, of course, but a lot of them are.
Yeah.
And they have to give them a job that takes full advantage of their skills. Okay. This again goes back to the question you asked about the R&D mindset. Okay. So suppose someone is an expert in high frequency networking or whatever. So the company in India has to have some aspirations in that direction.
Yeah.
If the only thing they aspire to is buy low and sell high, what will they do to these people? And please don't forget, these people might be thrown out of the US, but they don't automatically have to come back to India.
Yeah.
For
There are
instance,
some,
for instance, China has launched what they call the K visa. I'm sure you know about it.
yeah.
Which is they are saying that okay, you Indians, you are feeling unwelcome in the US. Okay, you don't have to go back to India. Come to China. Now there may be issues of food and language and all that, but maybe at least some people will go. So leaving the US is one thing, coming back to India is a different thing entirely. So, and I think frankly that the onus is much more on the Indian industry than it is on the Indian government.
Thank you so much for this insightful conversation with us, sir, and for giving us time today. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. Thank you very much.